Freelancer. This podcast discusses all things publishing through a social justice lens. My name is Andy Hodges. I'm a cultural anthropologist turned fiction writer and editor, and I own a book editing business called The Narrative Craft. Make sure you subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode, and sign up for my newsletter in the show notes if you want more regular updates. And this week, I'm chatting with Vesna Kurilic again, owner and senior editor of Shtriga books. And we are going to be discussing gendered language and non-binary characters and authors in fiction. So hey there, Vesna.
Thanks for having me back.
Yay, thank you for coming back. First question to you. Many of the listeners know that conscious and inclusive language, which I'll link to in the show notes, for those who don't know, is a big thing in the UK and US editing world. And manuals like the Chicago Manual of Style, which is widely used for fiction editing, emphasizes the importance of using inclusive language. What's the state of play with those debates in Croatia?
Are we speaking fiction or non-fiction or like the public sphere?
What's it like for fiction writers and editors?
So for the people in Croatia who write in English, I think we follow the current state of the rest of the world. So we're really trying.
Mm.
But for people writing in Croatian, I'm not really seeing that many efforts in inclusive language regarding gender and gendered expressions and non-binary characters, etc. In Croatia, the biggest push for more inclusivity comes from NGOs, especially local human rights NGOs, and they're mostly keeping it to their copy and to their public speaking and to their legislative drives, etc. And it didn't really transfer into fiction yet, I'm afraid. There are people who are trying, especially some, I think, sci-fi writers of speculative fiction in general, and also queer authors. But the rest of Croatia, I've seen next to nothing on that front.
Okay, so within Croatia, there isn't a big public discourse on specifically conscious language or inclusive language outside of these kind of NGO bubbles?
Not all of them are bubbles. Some of them do get featured in major news outlets, but I haven't seen that many, unfortunately, no. Also, a lot of the times, since we are currently leaning back to the right in politics in Croatia and in Croatian society in general, there are more pushbacks from people when somebody tries to, use a neutral pronoun if you don't know who the person is, or include more feminine pronouns. Don't just default to the default of using the male pronouns for everything. Also, I would be really interested in what your take on the subject is from your perspective. Did you see any discourse? Because we're in different, I'm in genre fiction, you follow more literary fiction, I think, in Croatia, or just know more of.
So my experience working with authors is that when writing in English, they're generally open to inclusive language edits. As you say, it's not just in Croatia. There's been a massive pushback because of US shifting massively to the right, to the hard right, far right, whatever. That's had big knock-on. Too far to the right, yeah. That's had a massive knock-on effect in the UK as well. And sure, I've seen that in Croatia as well with the discussions around, fascist slogans and things like that in public space. So, yeah, which we won't go into now. But
no, we're going to keep to fiction. It's easier.
I would like to keep to fiction here. Although I do wish that was fiction rather than fact. Yeah. It feels like there's also kind of a rebellious streak in not just in Croatia, in the Balkans, as well as in those kind of things are for the West, and we want to say things how we want, sort of a kind of
the way our grandparents said them.
Yeah,
your grandparents were Italian and Polish, and give me a break.
Exactly. I know. When I was living in Croatia, it felt like the main discussions at that time, which is 10 years ago now, the influence of the English language on Croatia and protecting the Croatian language from these negative
from the internet
negative influences. Yeah. Which are also talking points in different ways in the UK. Or like text speak was a big thing here. People were like, it's going to ruin the language. That was like a discourse 20 years ago, which seems really silly now, but people were saying that kind of thing. If we focus on like singular they has been a massive flashpoint in this discussion and in these debates in the UK and the USA. And guides like Chicago have become more progressive as they've updated their recommendations. And now they permit use of singular they in formal documents as well, whereas before it was seen as a less formal thing. Using that as an example, and I watched the Eurovision when Croatia came second, and there was a big public debate about the non-binary.
Gender. Yes.
Yeah. So how is singular they handled in Croatian, and has there been any discussion or debate?
To my knowledge, we saw what the English-speaking world was doing, and we said, no, thank you. But
okay.
There's a big exception. Leaving people in the streets, like leaving queer people, younger people in Rijeka, are trying to test whether the singular they fits them.
Okay.
Also, a lot of non-binary people, even those who default to the quote-unquote opposite pronoun, personal pronouns for them, when they socially transition and live their non-binary identity more fully.
Mm-hmm.
So they would default to the quote-unquote opposite pronoun in Croatian, but they still use the singular they when speaking in English.
Okay.
There's also been, I've heard, reported instances, I mean locally, not like reported to somebody, but people told me that they know people, where the queer youth prefer using English in their personal conversations because it's more neutral. It's still not really helpful in terms of speaking about fiction, because in fiction, I'm not sure I've seen any uses of singular they in Croatian, be it in translation or in Croatian origin written word, or in fiction written in Croatian originally. I might be wrong because I've been reading almost exclusively in English for a while now. The only fiction I read in Croatian is fiction I'm editing, so it's not translation. Yeah. But I think it's harder to use the singular they in Croatian language, because it really thinks of plural, even more to my ear than in English. But the big issue is if we started and in 20 years' time, it would probably change. The way we hear the language would probably change the same way it has changed in English. Yeah. And also it's not a new thing. For us, a couple of decades ago, a big thing was including he or she. And we're still not over that. We're still not fully on board with even that. And I feel this would be a good, but even a further step for the Croatian language. I'm not sure it's going to happen anytime soon. Sorry if it's too much of a downer.
Yeah. Is the neutral gender ever used? Because that would be a no-no in English. It's perceived as dehumanizing calling somebody it, unless they're a robot like murder. But what's that like in Croatian?
Okay, so there's a semi-notorious example already. I think it's already been over 20 years. There was a famous character in the Vorkosigan saga series by Lois McMaster Bujold, which was a major influence on speculative fiction writers and readers in Croatia. And there was a character who I think they used the neutral gender for themselves. I think it was before the singular they. Not sure, but I think so. And different translators treated their language differently. I think at least one person tried to use ono, or it didn't stick. But other translators did what I said, that people who changed the way they speak about themselves from what they had been given socially and what their true gender expression is in Croatian, I think they defaulted to another pronoun for the character, the translators. The most discussions I've had on this topic specifically was with my partner Antonia, my co-owner of Shtriga, who has Croatian language and literature diploma. So she's a Croatist, which is like a sacred thing in Croatia.
Yeah, I know.
And she's extremely against ono.
Right.
Exactly for the reasons you said. The character is not a child. The character is not a pet. The character is not an object. So that would be a no from us too.
Yeah, because in Croatia, children are neutral gender. Yeah.
But
okay.
in theory, yes, but in practice, people use gendered pronouns for kids more often than not.
Yeah.
It's important to know whether you're wearing pink or you're wearing blue.
So, are there any other issues with gendered language that show up in your writing and editing work?
Our biggest hurdle, the thing, is past tenses.
Past tense.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
They're gendered in Croatian. A bit like in French with je suis allé. Yeah, that's probably the example many listeners would know.
You need to express your gender when you're speaking about yourself, and you need to address the other person's gender or perceived gender when you're talking to them. Everything gets changed regarding gender. And another issue, as we've mentioned a couple of minutes ago, is the first person, because the first person also almost exclusively needs to be gendered in Croatian. Not necessarily in the present tense, but still, if you're trying for something different, either for a more inclusive language or for an experiment or whatever in Croatian, you need to really switch things around, turn things around to change your perspective on things and do mental and language gymnastics to avoid gender. It's fun. It's a lot of fun, but not that many authors dare to do that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just thinking about the word my in English, then in Croatia, you have so many different endings on that depend on gender and case. So I think what's going on there with the mental gymnastics is you have to deeply change your mindset about what is happening with gender in the language there, because otherwise you will slip into old habits of using dominant genders and things like that.
And also active and passive language, because that's also one of the ways you can switch things up. But it's different. You're not saying the same thing.
Yeah, I can just imagine it would be really difficult handling stuff like that on a practical level with the Croatian language. But it also sounds like a fun challenge. So, yeah.
If I can pitch one example I've seen where neutral gender was handled brilliantly, it's been a while since the story was published, and it was only published in Croatian, and I think only in print, so I'm really, really sorry about it. But our beloved late author of speculative fiction, Milena Benini, one of our biggest fantasy writers of all time, she wrote a wonderful story called Ru I oružje, Ru and the Weapons, where there were no slips in her writing in the story. It was perfectly neutral. I've loved it. I really, really loved it. So yeah, if you can read Croatian, it's a recommendation from me.
That's great. And I'll put a link to some information about Benini in the show notes as well. I think that's really important. Next question. Well, you've already touched on this now, but any novels or stories with a non-binary focus with a Croatian link that you'd like to talk about?
Apart from Ruined Oružje, Ruined the Weapons, I couldn't think of any, which might be a personal thing, a personal failure. But I would really, really like to shout out my colleague and friend, Kurilic, who's a singular they artist and comic strip artist and professor at the Academy of Applied Arts in Rijeka. And they do wonderful work with exploring gender, especially non-binary identities in their graphic novels and their shorter comics. Their website is kurilic.com, so it's really easy to read their comics online.
Okay, I'll definitely put a link. Another link going in the show notes.
All the links.
I can mention briefly some literary fiction stuff. Okay, I don't know many examples either, but one example I do know is there's a book called Sons, Daughters by Ivana Bodrožić, and that's been translated into English by Ellen Elias Bursac, who is a really well-known translator of literary fiction from Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, Montenegrin. And this is a novel which I've not read yet, but I really want to read. It's on my TBR list.
Now it's mine too. Thank you.
about the love between a transgender man and a woman. And it sounds from the blurb, which I'll link to it in the show notes, but it sounds very much about these family relationships and about identity and gender, pain, and so on. So I'll share that, but there are a few other examples. If I really dug into the literary fiction space, I do know that there's socially progressive work going on in that space that is translating interesting works into English, and that would be another great topic for another episode. Yeah, I wish there was more. That's the only thing.
The only other thing I could think of is a couple of novellas from my partner, Antonija Mežnarić. She writes a lot of trans suffix in her horror fiction. Yeah, because she's an avid reader of trans authors in horror. I think her books are a body horror written by trans authors. So yeah.
Cool. I really like reading horror as well.
Mm-hmm. I edit it. I hate reading it, but I love editing.
Yeah. I mean, atmosphere, tension, those are really fun things to...
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Anything else that you want to say on this topic?
Yeah. You got to choose for yourself. If you're a writer who writes in a gendered language or a language gendered as extensively as Croatian, you have to choose for yourself. I've heard some initiatives from, I think it was Serbian or Bosnian, I can't remember, where there was an initiative to use the neutral versions of standard words. Like an example, which probably won't translate well, is kućanica, which is like a housewife. And the neutral version would be kućanče. Or would it? Which is like, the problem is that the che is often used for also pets and children and diminutives. So it's there are so many options. None of them are perfect. But I still think it's worth the effort to do the gymnastics and pose it as a challenge for yourself to see what you can do. The problem is that you have to learn everything else, plotting and style and characterization and everything when you're a writer. So that might be a step too far for you. But if you want to try, I think it's better to try and have failed and not to have tried at all.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And also, the great thing about writing is you start writing, you write something that might not be that great, but then you can come back to it 2 or 3 years later when you know so much more and do the gymnastics. Then, yeah, that's what's so good about it. Nothing you write is ever wasted, is what I like to say. So, okay. So, yeah, thank you very much again. This is a really interesting and important discussion that
Thank you. It was really, really fun.
Yeah, I might pick this discussion up again at some point in the future as I learn more about what's happening also in the literary fiction space, because I think it's super important, especially right now with all this hard right stress in the world. Yeah,
existential dread.
Yeah, stress. No, it's existential dread. Yeah. So thank you for being a guest here again. I will put links to Shtriga books and everything else in the show notes, and thank you as well to everybody who's listened this far. So subscribe if you haven't already, and you will hear from me again very soon.